I never thought I'd be the person who discovers their entire life is built on quicksand. But here I am, sitting in my new apartment, watching the sunset through windows that are mine alone, trying to make sense of how quickly everything collapsed. My name is Eliza, and 6 months ago, I had what most would call a perfect life. A successful career as a graphic designer, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a husband of 12 years who I thought was my best friend. We didn't have children, a mutual decision we made early in our marriage, but we had built what I believed was a solid partnership. Mom had been sick for a while, pancreatic cancer that moved too quickly for any of us to really process. She was diagnosed in January and gone by March. The grief hit me like a physical blow. Mom had been my rock, my confidant, the person who always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. What made it worse was that she died just 2 weeks after my 38th birthday. The last time I saw her conscious, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry I won't be here to help you through your 40s. They're harder than people tell you." The funeral was a blur. I remember standing beside her casket, my husband James at my side, his arm around my waist. I remember the smell of too many lilies and the sound of my aunt sobbing in the front row. What I remember most clearly, though, was the weight of the envelope the lawyer handed me afterward. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said. She was very specific about the timing. Inside was the deed to her house, the home I grew up in, and a life insurance policy worth $175,000. There was also a letter, written in her familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm sorry to leave you, especially now. There are things I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid it would hurt you more than help you. This money is for you. Not for James, not for his family, not for anyone else. I've watched how they treat you for years, how they take and take while giving so little in return. I've bitten my tongue because I didn't want to come between you and your husband, but I can't stay silent anymore, even in death. Hi. Use this money to build your future. Keep it separate. You may need it sooner than you think." I read the letter 3 times, standing there in the funeral home parking lot, before folding it carefully and tucking it into my purse. James asked what it said, and I told him it was just a goodbye letter. Something in me, some instinct I didn't yet understand, made me keep the contents to myself. That night, as we drove home in silence, James finally spoke. "So, what are you going to do with the money?" I glanced at him, surprised by the directness of the question. "I don't know yet. I haven't had time to think about it." He nodded, eyes on the road. "We could put it toward the kitchen renovation we've been talking about. Or maybe pay down the mortgage." "Maybe," I said noncommittally. "I think I need some time first. It doesn't feel right to spend it right away." He reached over and squeezed my knee. "Of course, take all the time you need." But over the next few weeks, the questions continued. Subtle at first, then increasingly direct. What was I planning to do with the money? Had I thought about investing it? His brother Mark was starting a business and looking for investors. Wouldn't that be a great opportunity? I kept deflecting, saying I wasn't ready to make decisions while still grieving. In truth, my mother's warning had planted a seed of caution that was slowly taking root. Then came the dinner at James's parents' house, 6 weeks after Mom's funeral. His entire family was there. His parents, Robert and Diane, his brother Mark and his wife Vanessa, his sister Caitlin and her husband Pete. It was the first time we'd all been together since before Mom got sick. The conversation flowed around me as I pushed food around my plate, not really hungry. I was only half listening until I heard my name. "Eliza's mother left her quite a bit of money," James was saying. "We're trying to decide the best way to use it." "Oh?" Diane leaned forward, interest sparking in her eyes. "How wonderful. Your mother was always so practical." Before I could respond or decide whether I even wanted to, James answered for me. "About $175,000. Plus her house, but Eliza's planning to sell that." I wasn't planning anything of the sort. The house was still full of Mom's things. I hadn't even begun to sort through them. "Well," Mark said, setting down his wineglass with a decisive clink, "as James probably told you, I'm looking for investors for my new tech venture. The return potential is enormous." "He mentioned it," I said carefully, "but I'm not making any decisions right now." "Of course not," Vanessa chimed in, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "But you know, opportunities like this don't come along every day." "Mark's business plan is solid," Robert added. "We've put in $50,000 ourselves." The conversation continued around me. everyone discussing what I should do with my inheritance, as if I wasn't even there. James kept nodding along, occasionally saying things like, "We've been considering that option," or, "That's definitely on our list." I felt increasingly invisible, my grief and my autonomy, both being steamrolled by their collective certainty about what was best for my money. Finally, Diane turned to me with what I'm sure she thought was a kind smile. "Darling, I know you're still grieving, but sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to use what they've left you wisely. Your mother would want you to be practical." Something in me snapped. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "Mom was very clear about what she wanted me to do with the money. She left me a letter," I continued. "She wanted me to use it for my future specifically." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Caitlin, always the peacemaker, quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. In the car on the way home, James was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I embarrassed you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You told your entire family about my inheritance without asking me. You made it sound like we'd already decided to invest in Mark's business. It's a good opportunity, and we're married. What's yours is mine, right? Isn't that how it works?" "Not automatically, no. Especially not with an inheritance. And especially not when you're making decisions without even consulting me." He sighed heavily, like I was being unreasonable. "Look, I know you're still grieving. But your mother's gone, Eliza. This money could do real good for our family." The look he gave me then, a mixture of surprise and something darker, sent a chill down my spine. It was the first time in our marriage that I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Sigh. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother's letter, about her warning. Had she seen something in James and his family that I had been blind to? Had I been so caught up in being the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, that I'd missed the signs? The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my mother's house. I needed space to think, to breathe. As I walked through the quiet rooms, running my fingers over her belongings, memories flooded back. Not just of her, but of moments throughout my marriage, when James's family had subtly undermined me or dismissed my opinions. Times when James had sided with them instead of me, always with a reasonable explanation that made me feel like I was overreacting. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, the same table where we'd had countless conversations over cups of tea, and I started making notes. Small incidents that had bothered me but that I'd brushed aside. Patterns of behavior that, when viewed together, painted a concerning picture. By the time I left that evening, I had made two decisions. I would keep my inheritance completely separate from our joint finances, and I would start paying closer attention to my marriage. I opened a new bank account the next day, one in my name only, and deposited the insurance check. I didn't tell James. It wasn't that I was planning to hide it forever. I just needed time to figure things out without pressure. For the next few weeks, I watched and listened more carefully than I ever had before. I noticed how often James made decisions without consulting me, then presented them as if they were joint choices. I noticed how his family treated me, not with outright disrespect, but with a subtle dismissiveness, as if my opinions were cute, but ultimately unimportant. And I noticed something else, something that made my stomach twist with anxiety. James had started checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Twice I caught him scrolling through my emails while I was in the shower. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "Just seeing if you responded to my message about dinner," or, "I was looking for that photo you took last weekend." But his explanations didn't ring true, and a growing sense of unease took root in my chest. Then came the day I tried to log into my online banking and found my password had been changed. I called the bank, verified my identity, and reset it. When I finally got in, what I saw made my blood run cold. There had been a transfer from my personal account, the one with my inheritance, to our joint account. $50,000. Moved 3 days earlier. Menace. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I hadn't authorized that transfer. I hadn't even given James the account information. With a growing sense of dread, I checked our joint account. The $50,000 was gone, transferred out the same day to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank again, this time speaking to the fraud department. Yes, they confirmed. The transfer from my personal account had been initiated online using my credentials. No, there was no way to reverse it without filing a police report for fraud. I hung up, my mind racing. How had James gotten access to my account? Then I remembered my laptop. I'd logged into the bank website on my laptop at home. He must have seen my password, or found it saved in my browser. I drove home in a daze, unsure of what I would say to him, how I would confront this betrayal. But when I pulled into our driveway, there was an unfamiliar car parked there, Mark's SUV. I walked into my own home to find James, Mark, and Robert sitting at our dining room table, papers spread out between them. They looked up when I entered, and the guilty expressions that flashed across their faces told me everything I needed to know. James stood up, coming toward me with his hands outstretched. Eliza, I can explain. We were just finalizing the investment in Mark's company. The investment of my money? The money you took from my account without my permission? I didn't take it, he said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone I now recognized as manipulation. I moved it to our joint account. For us. And then you moved it to Mark's business account, I said flatly. Without telling me. I was going to tell you once everything was set up. I didn't want to bother you with all the paperwork and details while you're still grieving. Robert stood up, straightening his jacket. Eliza, I understand you're upset, but this is a family investment. We're all in this together. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. We're not. That was my money, my inheritance, and you stole it. Stole? James looked shocked, then angry. We're married. What's yours is mine. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Look, if this is going to cause problems, maybe we should. After they left, James and I had the worst fight of our marriage. He accused me of being selfish, of not caring about his family's future. I accused him of theft and betrayal. Round and round we went, until finally he stormed out, saying he was going to stay at his parents' house until I came to my senses. As soon as he was gone, I called a locksmith to change the locks. Then I called a lawyer. Orozo. What followed was a whirlwind of legal actions. I filed a police report for the unauthorized transfer. I froze our joint accounts. I documented everything, every conversation, every text message, every email. The lawyer helped me file for an emergency court order to prevent any further transfers from my accounts. James was furious when he found out. He called me constantly, alternating between anger and pleading. His family closed ranks around him, sending me messages about how I was tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding, and as the investigation progressed, I discovered it was far worse than I had initially thought. The detective assigned to my case found evidence that James had been planning this for months. There were emails between him and Mark discussing my mother's illness and the likely inheritance. There were searches on James's computer about how to access a spouse's bank accounts. And most damning of all, there was a draft business plan on his laptop that outlined how they would use my inheritance as seed money for a business that would be owned solely by James, Mark, and Robert. The confrontation came at the courthouse, during a hearing about the emergency order. James arrived with his family and a lawyer, all of them projecting confidence. They clearly thought they could charm their way out of this, or at least minimize it as a domestic dispute rather than fraud. Point Thaler. They weren't expecting the evidence I had gathered. They weren't expecting the detective to testify about the premeditated nature of their actions. And they certainly weren't expecting the judge to refer the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. I'll never forget the look on James's face when he realized how badly he had miscalculated. The shock, the anger, and finally, the fear. In the end, I got my money back. Most of it anyway. Mark's business account had been frozen before they could spend much of it. James and I are in the middle of divorce proceedings now. His family has stopped contacting me entirely, which is a relief. I sold my mother's house, my choice this time, and used some of the proceeds to buy my apartment. It's smaller than our house was, but it's mine, and there's something deeply comforting about that. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this one, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I wonder if my mother somehow knew what would happen. If she had seen cracks in my marriage that I had been too close to notice. Or maybe she just knew her daughter well enough to know that I would need an escape route someday. Either way, her final gift wasn't just the money, it was the warning that came with it. The permission to put myself first for once, the reminder that I deserved better than what I had settled for. I'm still grieving. For my mother, for the marriage I thought I had, for the future I had planned. But I'm also building something new, something that's truly mine, and in that I found an unexpected strength. Mom was right about one thing for sure. Your 40s are harder than people tell you. But she forgot to mention that they can also be the beginning of something better, something truer, a life built not on quicksand, but on solid ground.